Well, shall we sing the national anthem and see who kneels?
Wow, right off the end.
Right away. Right there. There was like
Mike, you want to handle that one?
There's going to be a fine.
Welcome, Ashwin. You always laugh the hardest at my jokes. Thank you very much. So welcome to this first panel, forum, whatever you want to call it. I'm going to throw a curveball. We have an outline, but many of my current and recently former students here, I'd like to talk about the placement program with your guys' permission. Dave and Mike have been so kind over the years. Mike was the very first, and you have their bios, so you know who these people are. I don't need to spend any time introducing them, and if I started with Mike, he would say, oh, just stop, right, because he's so humble. But Mike was the very first person to sponsor a sports law placement when I was, by then Dean Kagan, appointed to become equivalent of permanent visiting lecturer in sports law. And Mike, certain people on this panel have been placement holders for you. And why don't we talk about, for those who want to get into the business, how these placements work and how important they are, because the theme of this is how do you get into the industry, and once you're in, how do you make it work? So why don't we start with Mike?
It just makes me feel old. Two of my former interns are up here on the panel with me. It's awesome. At the time that this program started, I was doing all the business side legal stuff for the Celtics in addition to being assistant GM, and so I really just needed some help, and we weren't hiring another lawyer, and so we sort of created this spot where the person for the year really got to be the business side lawyer for the Celtics, despite often being a 2L in law school. And I don't know if that was sounds awful for the Celtics or not, but it was really great for us. People here are really smart and need practical experience, so we needed help. And in addition to that, I sort of thought that it was just the right thing to do at the time. And it's changed some part due to Peter and this drafting course that we created. But people here learn how to write briefs and memos and figure out what the court's going to do in a particular case, but they don't learn how to draft contracts. Or at least they weren't being taught very well how to draft contracts at the time. And that's the meat of this business. There's a lot of other things that all the people up here on this panel do, but in large part you're dealing with vendor agreements and sponsorship deals and other sorts of business agreements, and that just hasn't been the meat of law school. So it's been really, really cool to see a bunch of really, really talented people, in many cases much more talented than I was in law school, come through our program and other placements that Peter's had, and have an impact on sports teams and help us, and we help them, and it's been really great.
It's terrific. And who were the unlucky two that had to work with Mike? Go ahead. Jihad.
I think I was the first.
I think you were the first.
Jihad was the very first
one.
Very first. It's always good to be like a Jewish guy hiring your first intern, a guy named Jihad. But
it worked.
It went great. It went great for everyone.
It's been uphill ever since, yep.
I made that joke. Yeah. That's okay. He's never heard that one before. So. But it's just been a fantastic thing, and Jihad and Ashwin were both two of the stars for our group at the office, and people still talk about both of them and how great they were, and obviously they've gone on to have awesome careers themselves, which I'm sure they'll be talking about shortly. But we've been just very, very lucky to have incredible students come through here, which probably isn't a surprise to anyone in this room.
Let's just stay with it for a second. So, Jihad, part of the plan is to talk about your career trajectory to where you are now with the 49ers, and your path very different from Ashwin's, right? A firm and then into sports law, and then Ashwin straight into sports law. So please pick up where Mike left off.
I mean, for me, it was after doing the time that I spent with Mike, which was an amazing time, and everything that Mike said is totally true, in that when I was in law school, a lot of it was about, cases and litigation, and never really got too much exposure to life in the corporate world, the in-house world. And so kind of my first exposure was with Mike, and that was when I really saw that I eventually did want to go in-house. And I had so much fun during that time. It helped that we won a championship that
It wasn't
year.
a bad thing.
That helped. No, I did not get. No, I did not get a ring.
The interns don't get the ring.
Interns don't get rings.
Interns don't get
Sorry.
I cried.
You got like a nice hat or a T-shirt.
I got a really cool hat. I should have worn it. But that was when I really first got the sense that I really wanted to work in-house for a team as opposed to somewhere else in the sports industry, whether it was league or whether it was on the agency side. It really was that experience that exposed me to what it was like to be in-house and work on the business side. And so for me, I knew from that I wanted to get maybe a little bit more experience and exposure to the different types of law that were out there. And so I did go to a firm. I was at Covington & Burling in D.C. for 4.5 years before I moved to the 49ers. So for me, that was kind of a really important experience of going to a firm and getting that hands-on legal work, whether it was doing M&A stuff, litigation, general corporate transactions, those types of things. Those are the things that now that I'm really happy that I had that exposure to and had got those experiences. Whereas others went straight in-house to a team and they may have had those same things at the team level and had those experiences. Mine just came at a firm, and at least for me, it worked for me because now that I'm in-house and I've seen what it's like to handle big litigation at the outside counsel level, it helps me at least manage that a little bit better, knowing that I was there, I know what those billing practices are, I know how to spot when someone may be fudging a little bit, and so for me, having that experience did help. But there's really no right way to do it. It's more what works for you in terms of your long-term goals.
And Ashwin, you took the path very infrequently traveled, going right into your position out of a placement into a position with the Marlins.
Yeah, I again, like Jihad said, I credit Mike with really giving me that first internship and opportunity, and Professor Carfagna, of course, for recommending all of us to go seek that out. That's really where I start my story in terms of sports. That was my first exposure to what it actually is like to be a sports lawyer. Many of us talk about it, but until you actually do it, I think it's very hard to get a sense of what we do on a day-to-day basis and kind of what the different mix of work is. And Mike was really great about that. He had a million different responsibilities, but at the same time, he was always available, always there to let us know kind of, whenever we had questions, because for a large part of what he said is true in the sense that we really were kind of the counsel to all of the different business units that the Celtics had. We were the one kind of on site there. We were 2 L's in law school. We didn't know a lot, but at the same time, we had great training from Professor Carfagna, and we knew when to call Mike, and we knew he'd always be there for us. So that was really kind of the start for me. I was able to go directly to the Miami Marlins right after law school, but I kind of traced my path, and it starts with Mike and the opportunity he gave me.
Oh, no, you're blushing. Okay. So Megha, you were with the Red Sox, I think not working so much with Dave, but more on the baseball ops side.
I thought Dave was there yet. Yeah,
Yeah,
no. So I
weren't
was,
even there.
my first internship in sports was deduping the Red Sox proprietary scouting database that they were building at the time, which was not necessarily the most challenging work, but what's interesting is that it's sort of come full circle for me, and that one of our part owners now has a sports analytics company that builds scouting platforms for a bunch of teams. And so never did I necessarily think that experience would come in handy. And 10 years later, here we are, and it's been actually incredibly helpful at understanding that piece of the business. So at the Jags, we have sort of our football-related responsibilities, but then also have a handful of other portfolio companies for ownership, which is actually pretty common for team counsel, where you'll end up doing a number of other things. So we have a soccer UK football team, Fulham Football Club, that we also help manage sports analytics, and then everything I was telling these guys, from coconut tortilla chips to bakeries to real estate development downtown, which a lot of other teams are also doing around their sports complexes.
And Dave, let's come back. Dave, thanks. You've been a great sponsor like Mike with the Red Sox for many, many years now. And Paloma, will save your MLB placement and your MLB experience for last. But how do you view it from the sponsor's standpoint, and mentoring the 2 students you had last year, for example?
Yeah, we have tremendous students, and the only flaw with the program in J-term is it's way too short. You have 3 weeks, which are crammed in, and you're trying to teach them a lot and expose them to as much as they can. And like Megha, I feel the same way. We're a baseball team, but we're so much more than that. We also have a regional sports network, which has its own set of legal issues, and we're their lawyers as well. We have real estate holdings. We do other things because we own Fenway Park, like concerts. So, a particular 3-week chunk is so short, but the assignment may be baseball or maybe something else. We had some alcohol-related problem at a concert that we're dealing with, and here's some narrow legal issue to try to figure out in 3 weeks. So it's been a great program for us, and we appreciate the help.
Thank you. And Paloma, best for last. So, how'd you find your way back to MLB, right?
Well, I started as a J-term placement in the commissioner's office, which was very short, only 3 weeks, but convinced them to let me stay on as an intern during the semester and use that experience to get to know a lot of different people. And so after that, I sort of treated that as like, oh, that was really fun, and now I'm going to go do my real job because there's no way one of these positions is ever going to open up. I really thought, it just, with timing wasn't right or wouldn't be right. And so I worked at Kirkland Ellis and got some experience there. I worked at a boutique litigation firm in Houston, trying to get as many different skills as I could. And when I got the call when I was living in Houston, if I would like to come and interview back at the commissioner's office, I was tremendously surprised, and I think I was probably on a plane before I got off the phone. And I was so excited to get that opportunity, but that came directly from Paul Mifsud, who was my supervisor when I was in that J-term placement.
Yeah, and let's expand a little bit, because your job duties, when I visited you last January, what don't you do at your current desk at MLB? I mean, and why practicing law still matters is the theme, and I can see that it does for you, certainly.
Sure, I do a lot of different types of things, which keeps the days very short. I do have some exposure to labor, and although I have recently moved away from salary arbitration and grievances practice, I still work on the international side of things. I do a lot of our international litigation and arbitration work, which is really exciting, gives me a chance to use my Spanish. I would say between 30 and 40% of my work at any given time is in Spanish, which was a great professional differentiator for me when I showed up and wanted to be included on these. I offered to read all the documents. And in addition to that, I do our internal employment-facing work, which builds on some skills that I got when I was practicing in Houston. And beyond that, I also do compliance. So I do our compliance policy administration and I'm the compliance officer for that. It's
why our meeting was quite short, yes. Paul Mifsud, you had a lot of time for me. You had hardly any time when I stopped by your office. Paloma's doing all the work. I have plenty of time. Let's go to lunch. We have a lot of current students here. What would you say, Mike and Dave? Now, and Mike, you've morphed also over into the team side, but what would you recommend to the current students? It's sort of on our outline. Should they be seeking specialty areas? Dave, you had mentioned technology, to give the extra edge to those who want to get into the business. What would you recommend as sort of the course that they chart while they're here at Harvard?
It's a difficult question because there's not many of these jobs, and each team has a particular sort of set of needs. I try to tell people, because there's a lot of people that come to Harvard Law School and they want to be like United States senators, right? There's 100 United States senators. In the United States, there's about 1.3 million professional politicians from the town level all the way up to the president. These are people who work in government, basically, that are either elected or appointed. And there's 750,000 of those people. There's 750,000 professional politicians, and there's 100 U.S. senators. There's like 1.4 million lawyers in the United States, and there's 60 working for NBA teams. So your chances of becoming a United States senator, if you're a politician, are about 3 times as good as your chance of becoming an NBA team lawyer if you're a lawyer. It's just really hard to get these jobs, and when they open up, it's usually there's some specific need. It's not always general business law. Often it's, especially for most teams have some other business, as you're hearing here. We're one of the few teams that just operates a team, and we're a tenant in an arena. But it depends. Dave might need a real estate lawyer. We sort of have only ever needed a generalist, and finally we've, thank goodness, a few years ago hired a business side lawyer so I can concentrate on making the team better. But the common thread is you just have to be really, really capable and be able, especially in one of these in-house jobs, to jump from thing to thing and be competent in all the different things. So my advice to people is generally, when we were hiring our lawyer, we went and looked for someone who had done a bunch of licensing deals and had worked in-house. And we didn't care at all if they'd worked in sports. And the guy we ended up hiring actually had no sports experience, other than being college roommates with someone who went on to be a lawyer at the NBA. That was the connection. So one thing is, be in touch with your connections that you know. Even if you don't think they'll be useful to getting a job that you might get later, even if you have no idea, what they might get into later, random stuff happens that connects you with people who might have a connection to the industry. But then also, you've just got to have a lot of tools in your toolbox. Because these jobs, Megha's example is great. You didn't expect to be working on coconut tortillas, right? Like, that's not a sports law. Yes, it is a sports law thing. All these things are sports law things. So you got to be a generalist in-house. Pretty much any small to medium-sized company. It's just how it is.
Dave?
So I'm confused by the senator's analogies because I think you have to be like 86 years old to be U.S. Senator, Mike. So I don't know. Unless you're Ted Cruz, who I knew in law school, and he wasn't such a nice guy, but we're on camera, so I won't say what I otherwise say about Ted. But actually, one
The
thing that you
turnover's
should,
about the same. Maybe more in the Senate now.
maybe, hopefully. One thing I'll say about Ted, so he's like really not a nice guy. And again, I can't say anything public about him on camera because I get in trouble. I'm not allowed to say that on film. But actually in sports, you should be a nice guy. We're in an entertainment and fan-oriented culture. That's all we do is try to make people happy. So you'd be surprised, even in an accounting department, a legal department, having an outgoing personality and just being a nice person actually does matter, unlike being certain U.S. senators. I agree with Mike, having the right tool set is really important. And I think it sounds sort of generic and it's hard to sort of get past the banality of it, but having really good writing skills and listening skills, negotiation skills, and judgment, which is very hard to develop, but you can develop judgment. And ultimately you're working for a bunch of different business units, and how do you quickly have them trust you as a lawyer to be the person that they want to go to, as opposed to, this person's going to say no and make this hard. I don't want to talk to the lawyer. And those are the hard things that we have to deal with internally. But what makes you stand out from the other dozens and dozens and dozens of people who are interested in doing sports? It's very circumstantial. I'm not a good career path example, probably, because I never thought I'd do sports law. When I was sitting in your position, either as a student or a recent graduate, I thought I'd do a lot of other things, but I went from being in the Attorney General's office here in Massachusetts directly to the Red Sox. That's not a typical career path. So something that's just right place, right time.
And even like your department has expanded through secondment, as Ed was saying the other day, right? Maybe you want to explain that as a career path possibility.
Yeah, we had an opening because one of our lawyers went to Major League Baseball because that's where all the power resides. So she left and we had this opening, and we ended up having an attorney from one of the law firms essentially be seconded to our office. She was on site doing a ton of work on transactional issues. And then when Ed decided, hey, we should full-time hire someone, we'd already worked with her, and we knew that she was a good cultural fit, and she was a really good person and just very smart. And so that helps a lot. And, as Mike alluded to, it depends a little bit on what the opening is, because it's not as if you have just 5 or 6 lawyers in a department who all do the same thing. So my background, and the reason I think I'm there, is that I have a litigation background, I have an advocacy background, I have a political background, which actually helps in baseball because a lot of baseball, shockingly, is political. As opposed to a transactional background. If they needed someone when they hired me to do transactions, I wouldn't have been the right person, and I probably wouldn't have wanted that job. Mm-hmm. This person from a law firm who we ended up hiring was just a transaction lawyer. She had worked in tech before, and she'd been at a law firm, so she was the right fit for that job.
And Megha, you and Ashwin have been able to hire junior attorneys. What did you look for with Cassie when you hired her, for example?
So I have 2 attorneys that work with me now, and the need was really necessitated by football plus all of the other businesses. So I did come from a law firm. I spent 3.5 years at Proskauer in New York on the transactional side, doing M&A and finance. So sort of the opposite of Dave's experience, and litigation absolutely terrifies me, and luckily we don't have too much of it. Cassie, who's our general counsel, came right through team. So her first internship was with the Angels, she was at the Buccaneers, and then she basically lateraled over to the football team. And what was nice was that she had experience at the team level with a lot of different things. So we end up touching, just even at football, you have medical agreements that you have to handle because we have a few team doctors on staff, and HIPAA compliance is a huge issue for us. And then you'll have to pivot right from that to your pyro deal and your mascot jumping off the light towers and your cheerleaders and any number of other things that come. So she had a lot of experience working with the various business units at teams, which was a nice compliment to my experience doing mostly sort of bigger transactions of M&A and finance. And then we hired another attorney in December of 2016 who had a tech background. So I actually think that the businesses in general, so our entire medical record system at the NFL is electronic medical records. Much more of our business is focused on cutting edge technology. And so having somebody with that background is really, really helpful because data protection, licensing, those issues are coming up in every single deal, no matter what the vendor is necessarily providing.
And Ashwin, you hired an
so
assistant.
just about a year and a half ago, I hired a junior counsel when I was bumped up. And I think for me, I think it was Mike or Dave who said it, the personality was kind of the most important thing. I knew, having been in that role for 5 years, I knew all the different people you're going to have to interact with, from very senior VPs and our president to interns and coordinators and supervisors. So I knew that we needed someone who would be able to interact with all those different types of people, get along with them, help them reach their business objectives, but also be a strong enough lawyer. I think you'll see, like when you post one of these job openings, you get hundreds of resumes, and they're very talented lawyers, but it's really important to find that person who has the right personality. Stephanie had come from a background where she had interned for 3 different teams, so I knew that she was a fit, in those organizations, and was able to kind of get the general culture of how we operate. You deal with, as Megha just said, some pretty silly things: mascots jumping off buildings, fireworks being shot off. Things are just, some things that maybe more, law firm lawyers would not be used to handling. But I knew that Stephanie would be the right fit when I interviewed her, and so far she's been great, just because she really gets our culture and the personalities of the different people she has to work with.
And Jihad, you sort of went the other way from a firm, and Hannah and you just connected, and you want to be back in the Bay Area?
Yeah, I mean, it really was. It was my first internship at the NFL league office that ended up being the connection to the 49ers. I'd actually started at the 49ers when I was in undergrad as an intern on the football side. And so I'd worked there before and knew that I had, from the Bay Area, loved the team. I mean, I was like the lowest on the totem pole during that internship. Like the towel boy, told me what to do during that time. But I loved it, so I knew that I wanted to be back in California eventually. And so I'd done my 1L summer at the NFL, and my boss at the time, Derek Crawford, had come to DC for a weekend, and we'd had dinner, and he'd asked me what I wanted to do. And so in the long term, I said I was looking at eventually going back to the Bay Area, going back to preferably to a football team or to a basketball team. And he just, off the cuff said, I heard about a month ago about a position with the 49ers. I don't know if it's still open, but, I'll send you the info. And so I literally, I think it was probably a Tuesday, sent an email to the woman, Hannah, now who's my boss, saying, hey, I don't know if this is still available, but I'd be very interested. And so I think I sent it maybe 5 o'clock my time, and at 5:03 I got a phone call. I was like, this can't be, I sent it resume 3 minutes ago. And so, but she called me and she was like, hey, we're interviewing our final 2 people for this position this week, but if you're interested, if we'd had your resume earlier, we would have been very interested. And so we talked a little bit more. On the Thursday, a vice president called me and we chatted a little bit more, and then Hannah called me back and told me, if you can be here on Monday for an interview, we'll interview you. So, of course, I was there on Monday for the interview, and then it kind of just worked out and was offered the position that week. And so it really was, that initial, keeping that initial connection that I had from my 1L internship with my boss then, who's now at the NCAA. If that had never happened, who knows, where, when my next opportunity would have been. But I put myself in the right position at that time and had the kind of credentials at that point to, say, I'm a good fit for this position in terms of my credentials and my experiences. And then it was more about, does this, Derek always said there's kind of 3 C's to making sure that you get the position. It's, credentials is the first one because that will get you in the door. Character will actually make you a good candidate, but then having the connections to be able to know when the position is open and getting your foot in the door when it does open. And so for me, I had the, connections and I had the credentials, and then so it was just figuring out, does my character fit with this group's character? And it actually ended up being perfect. Hannah's the best boss. She is amazing. And she gets more and more responsibilities within the organization. And so for me, there's more and more responsibilities for me as well. But that fit has been so important, to my happiness, because I'm sure everyone here has had a job where they haven't had a good relationship at some point, with their boss. And, and it's so much better, day-to-day living when you have that good relationship. So one thing that I try to tell students, and this is always a tough balance for people, is, maybe sometimes jumping at the exactly first sports opportunity that you get isn't necessarily the best advice.
Right.
Like Mike was saying,
right.
These are very exclusive positions, and so most people think that you have to, whenever anything opens up, you have to jump in, no matter if it's not a good fit. If it's available, you jump at it. But, I would just, put a little bit of caution to that and say, make sure you're putting yourself in a good situation and make sure that you're actually you're not being clouded by the fact that it's sports, but that you're actually analyzing, where does this position fit with me? What are my, am I actually going to be doing, people I'm going to be working with? Am I going to dread coming to work because the people that I work with either don't trust me, don't respect me, or I don't have a good relationship with them? That is an important aspect of your own happiness that, will, when on a day-to-day basis, to me is more important than, I work for, at the perfect place in the perfect position, with the team I want to work for. It just so happened for me that all those things lined up, and so it was a very easy decision for me to say that I wanted to go there. But before I took that opportunity, there were other opportunities that were out there that, may or may not have made sense for me. And so you have to just think about, are these things that I really want to be doing in the long term? Is this position right for me, as opposed to just, I want to go work for, this team, or I want to go work for, this league.
Do I want to go live in Jacksonville, Florida?
Right.
You got to think hard about that one.
Well, a couple of things. I would say, add to your 3 C's, persistence. You're the only student in my 10th year here who is sitting in the front row as a 1L, right? You got into this. You went to the dean, got a special exemption.
Even
persistence,
persistence. Even with Mike, I don't even think that Mike actually wanted to offer me something.
No, that's true. That's true.
I really think
it was.
I would not stop emailing their president and calling their president, Rich Gotham, saying, "Hey, I'm available. I spent time working at the NFL this summer. I have XYZ skills. Put me to work. I'm willing to do something." And so eventually, I guess he got Mike. I was like, just give this guy anything.
Yeah, we still want to talk. It actually, I'll say this, we hadn't had a legal intern before, and there was some trepidation with that because my office is at our practice facility in Waltham, and our business office is downtown, and so this person was going to be somewhat unsupervised. And there was a little trepidation about that, and it didn't hurt that you'd already met Rich, our team president, and he was comfortable with that. And the rest of the interns should thank you for that, because I don't know how comfortable the whole organization would have been if you hadn't done that. And I didn't do anything to make that happen. That was all you. So persistence is absolutely key. And along with that comes the knowledge of when to stop being quite so persistent. There was a guy who used to email me literally every day, and the subject line of his emails was the date. And it was like, "Hi, Mr. Zarren, just checking in, see how you are." So there was always a resume attached once a week, and I'm like, first of all, there's also a date line at the top of the email. I don't need the subject line to tell me what date it is. There's a limit to that, but yeah, I think if you're not persistent at this and don't get discouraged when things don't happen exactly the way you intend, which, as a couple of people have said, might not actually turn out to be the best thing for you the way you intend it to be. Of
course, you have your dream job, right? You are
completely. There's no question about that. But like Dave said, my path is not a path I sort of suggest to people. I had no intention of working in sports. I didn't take the sports law class. I didn't network. I didn't send my resume anywhere. A buddy of mine sent me an email from the Celtics owners looking for an intern right after the book Moneyball had come out to do statistics, and I was in school here. And that email just showed up.
Right. Fortuitous.
But I was already going to every game with my dad, and so it just sort of worked out for me well. There's a longer version of this story, but I think, again, I had this connection with a guy who turned out to be a statistics professor here from college, and he just knew that I was a big Celtics fan and forwarded me the email, and then I had a set of tools, particularly statistical ones, but one of the things that convinced them to hire me was prior to me being at the Celtics, all the work was being done outside by Wilmer Hale, and it was very expensive, and so they weren't sending much to the lawyers, and there were all these internal risks that they knew about but they didn't want to spend on. So when they hired me, they said, do you mind doing a little bit of our team's legal work too? And I said, yeah, whatever, that's fine. I'm happy to do that. And over time that grew into all of the team's legal work. But you've got to be willing to do almost anything in this industry because these aren't huge organizations. The Fenway Sports Group is big for a sports team entity, and even that, how many people do you have?
Yeah, we only have 5 lawyers, and I totally agree. You have to be ready to jump in and deal with stuff. as it comes because we have a very small department.
Mike, you got to tell a story. So he sits with his dad at every home game, right?
This is true.
Way up in the rafters.
This is true.
So now you win the world championship.
We do.
And go ahead. Okay.
The people sitting around me at the time, this isn't still the case, but the people sitting around me at the time didn't know I worked for the team.
Right. Just
in part because we'd been sitting there forever. Since the
My-
building opened.
son
back
and
in the
dad,
previous building. And so the guy who sort of sits next to me with we were game 6, we were up, 35 points in the end of the third quarter, and the guy who sits next to me had Red Auerbach's favorite brand of cigars, and he handed me one, and he said, "We're going to light this up for Red the moment the final horn sounds." And I said, I don't know, I might have to smoke it down on the court with the players. And he's like, "Yeah, that's real
yeah,
fun."
right. Yeah, sure.
So 2 minutes left. We're up 30-something, so you don't have to wait and see what the result's going to be. So with 2 minutes left, there's a TV timeout that happens in the NBA, and so I went downstairs. He's like, "Where are you going?" And I'm like, "I'll be right back." And so I'm hugging Pierce on the bench, holding the cigar out, and he's looking at me. Apparently he tapped my dad. He said, "How do you get that?"
Who the hell is that guy? All right.
Very much, like Dave said, we're in the entertainment business, and I'm just super lucky, as Jihad is, to work for my favorite team, and it's been completely a dream. So I don't. As much as I like to tell people you're not going to get one of these jobs, they do exist, and so don't give up on that dream if you've got it, because if it happens, if and when it happens, to be getting a ring and sitting there with your dad as the banner gets raised, there's nothing better than that. I don't think there's anything better than that. Maybe there's a few things, but not very many, and so I've just been incredibly lucky, and. In large part due to this place. That's sort of why we're all here, right? It's the 200th birthday of this place, and it's created so many incredible opportunities, both for people to work in, and then those people create wonderful things for people elsewhere. So obviously incredibly thankful to the whole Harvard Law community for that.
Well, thanks for you too, and your partnership with the drafting course. But Jihad, I want to just go in that regard. Go back to you for a second. So you opened the door for David. Our first placement with the 49ers. So thank you for that. So the legacy continues.
Yeah,
right?
and David did so well this year that we've actually expanded, and we have a Stanford person as well that we've expanded because it's easy.
Well, no.
Local.
But that was not
during the school year.
That was not the lead-in.
But David did so well in his January term.
Right.
that
Okay.
I was
Back to
able,
script.
I was able to get expanded position. So thank you to David for providing opportunities as well.
Work harder, David. Do more. No, thank you. No, I know that was a heavy lift because what is this Harvard placement program?
Yes.
You and I were talking.
Yeah, because it really was. We had never had an intern before at all in our legal department. I think that there was concerns about confidentiality. There was concerns about how much time are we spending teaching these people what they have to do first, and then is it worth our time to put in? And David did such a great job for us that it really expanded my ability to argue for having more interns. And so we're happy to bring David back again this year and to have future Harvard J-turn people come in, because for us, we're a 2-person department, and we manage our own facility. We have the team. We have a bunch of venture businesses. And so there's a ton of legal work, and sometimes you end up doing, like they were saying. I think this year I was the co-chair of a bankruptcy on a creditors committee for some reason. I don't even know how that happened, but I ended up being the co-chair for this large bankruptcy because they're one of our sponsors and they went bankrupt. And so you never know what you're going to get. So you get all these different things coming, and so having David there, or having now more interns come through, it really frees us up to do as much as possible to keep on top of things, because that's really one of the most difficult things that you deal with is you have all this legal work, and in a perfect world you dedicate all the time that you need to do them perfectly, but you don't have all the time in the world, and you have to manage. You have to manage things and prioritize and meet people's expectations, and so you do what you can in some cases to get things to a position to where you feel comfortable, but they're almost never perfect.
Yeah, and Ashwin, I'll ask you because I remember sitting with you and your parents at graduation, and you had Skadden or the Marlins, and you had majored in sports law. I think you had more credits in sports law than anybody in the history of sports law.
I don't know. Megha gave me a ride.
I don't know. Yeah, Megha. Yeah, you guys, right? We're way up there.
Your work.
Right. But I remember your parents sort of saying to me, "What did you do to our son? Why isn't he going to Skadden? You know, why is he going to the
And I was
Marlins?"
back in California too.
Right, and I was back in California too. So,
questions for you.
any regrets? As you
None.
look back? Okay.
I now work a lot with outside counsel, particularly Skadden, as we have our new ownership group that just came in the beginning of this month. And I see the kind of work that they do, and I know how passionate I am about the work that we do. I really enjoy the work that we do as team counsel. I think we get to see a real variety of issues. I think we get to really be generalists, but also get to dive into specific areas at different times of the year. And I think that's what really keeps the job so interesting, is that every day I don't really know what I'm going to be focusing on or what I'm going to become an expert in. And it's fascinating to me. It keeps it interesting. Some of the lawyers that we work with on the outside counsel basis are experts in particular areas, whether it's tax law, labor law, antitrust, whatever it may be, IP law. And for me, I like the fact that I get to kind of delve into each of those subjects to a limited extent. So I have absolutely no regrets. I'm very fortunate that I was able to go straight to the Marlins.
Paloma, let's go back to you if we could. So one of our outline, time demands. What are your biggest challenges fulfilling your day-to-day, duties? I saw you in action, and you need 26 hours in a day, right? But what are your biggest challenges, and how do you prioritize what gets done first?
Well, I think like Jihad said, there's never time to make it perfect, which is a hard lesson to learn. You cannot let the perfect be the enemy of the good or the timely. And I think, making sure that you're meeting the needs of the business is really important. I mean, people have decisions to make that depend on your work, and you can't make them late. Mm-hmm. And so that's sort of the biggest, management principle for me. The other management principle, though, for me is giving myself time to think about things, because when you work too fast, you sometimes lose sight of not only the big picture, but sometimes the smaller picture too. And you know how when you see someone and they've been running on fumes for days, and they're, if for the students, if it's during exams, for example, and they start saying things, and you wonder to yourself, do you hear yourself? That I think comes from not giving yourself enough time to sit with your solution for a minute. And so I also try to give myself time to think about what I'm going to advise, just to make sure, just to give that time to, is this right? Is this really the right answer? And I think there's never enough hours in the day, and there's never enough time to be as much of an expert on anything as I would like. But I think trying to respond to the needs of the business is really the most important.
Yeah. Megha, your responsibilities have grown the most probably of anybody on the panel.
Yeah, I don't think it's uncommon for in-house counsel to end up taking all of the job responsibilities sort of fall through the cracks for other departments. Yep. So I have, in part, responsibility for security. I have technology. I have HR, which is pretty common that rolls up through in-house counsel, and office services. And so Paloma's right. Like, you need to get used to the feeling of drinking out of a fire hose. It took me about a year to learn this, but what I started doing was I realized that I needed to structure my day. You are responsive to their business units, they're your clients, and they are right next to you, so they know exactly where to find you. I needed to start structuring my day and putting some parameters in place so that they could get my best, most thoughtful work, because otherwise I was finding that I was running so quickly from thing to thing that it wasn't necessarily going to be helpful. So some really just like tactical things that I started doing was I block off every Friday from 12 to 5. If you have an actual emergency, then I'll be available to you. But otherwise, it's a time when I can then block off time to do my work, because otherwise I had a day of meetings and then a night job of drafting agreements, which isn't sustainable or workable long term. I'll block off time during every single morning because I know that's when I can do my best, most thoughtful work. We installed pools at the stadium in 2014, so I'll go sit up by the pools, which means that I'm close enough should anything come up, but it's much easier to read contracts with your feet dipped in the water. I started working outside because our offices are in the stadium itself, and so I would move to Florida, and the greatest travesty was never getting any sun. And it's nice because people know that I'm close and I have my email, but I just needed to distance myself from time to time. The worst place to get any work done that requires concentration is sitting in my office. And so once I started doing that, it became a little bit more manageable in terms of the workday, because otherwise people will be knocking on your door inside. There's a line outside at times.
Yeah.
And sometimes it's like, oh yeah, and we want to have fireworks in the arena tomorrow.
Right.
You're like, what?
Right.
Well, Mike, coming back to you and Dave, I mean, your responsibilities too have grown like Mopsy, and in your case now you're an AGM as well. So how do you triage that between practicing law?
It was just impossible to triage for so long, and we don't really have the option to go work outside very often here.
It's one for Jacksonville.
No pools at Fenway Park.
Yeah.
Right.
Yes. I don't, the funny thing for me is I got started doing the basketball stuff right from the get-go, so it's been, sort of no change over time. What's changed is I just have so many more responsibilities and people to manage now, and so it just became very clear to everyone that we had to hire someone to do most of the business side legal work, and he's killing it at that. So I don't, everybody here will say the same thing to you. You just got to have the best people around that you can. And if you're working in a good team environment, people understand that sometimes you can't do stuff. The first year after we hired someone to do the business side stuff, I got an email from someone a couple weeks before the trade deadline saying, "Where's the email?" I'm like, "What are you talking about?" And he said, "Well, you used to send out this email every year that said there won't be any legal work done for the next 2 weeks because it's 2 weeks before the trade deadline and you're just going to be working on trades." Like, I missed that email. I'm like, well, I don't miss that email, right? Because then, of course, the week after the trade deadline, when everyone else in the NBA is like catching their breath, I had 3 weeks of legal work to do in that week. You just juggle things as best you can. I don't think there's anybody on the operations side of this business either who doesn't have too many things going on, from college scouting to trade discussions to some agents upset that their players not playing as much. And, you've got this big tech project going on to create a new scouting database or something. There's just lots of different things all the time in these businesses. And like I said, they're just not big businesses. I took a economics of sports class from Alan Sanderson at the University of Chicago when I was an undergrad, and he pointed out the window and said, how many people here know what's inside that building outside the window? And nobody, I had been up drinking on the roof of that building one night, so I knew it was in that building. It's National Opinion Research Center. And he made clear that they had the same number of employees and the same amount of revenues as the Bulls. And everyone in the room, this is like the 90s, everybody knew the Bulls really well then. So, we take up a quarter of the section of the newspaper, but we're just not a big business. And when you go work in-house at not a very big business, even these guys aren't that big a business, there's just a lot of weird stuff going on all the time, and it's the same on the operations side as it is on the legal side. I've sort of been lucky enough to work in both of them, but the challenges are not so different as an assistant GM as they are as general counsel.
Well, we talked about this yesterday as a trend, Sashi Brown, with the Browns leaving legal, going on to the ops side, Jason Hillman with the Cavs. So then the win-loss determines rather than doing good legal work. Would you recommend that for those who are interested?
I was speaking in Professor Carfagna's class yesterday, and a guy asked me, "Aren't you concerned about the risk of losing your job? It's so much less stable on the basketball side." And I said, if you're ever in a job where that's your prime concern, you probably won't do a good job. So you just can't be worried about that.
Yeah.
At some point, Danny's either going to retire or they're going to fire all of us. That's just how it works. And it's the same for every GM and every head coach in this business. The coaching cycle's a little bit shorter than the GM cycle most places, but you can't spend your time worrying about that. You got to spend your time, especially in this city, you got to spend your time worrying about the banners. That's really what it's about. We're lucky enough to have owners who understand that. They've stuck through, the first 4 years I worked at the Celtics, we got worse every year. And I said, what am I helping do to my favorite team? This is a disaster. But we sort of had a plan in place, and we, didn't know that it was going to work out quite as well. It did, but, the next year there's some correlation. We hired Jihad, and then we had the biggest single-season turnaround in NBA history.
Hasn't worked so with the 49ers.
Yeah.
He got a nice hat. I got a ring. Everyone's happy, right? So I don't know. You just can't. It's a weird business. maybe more so on the business side, right? Because there's all these things that the business side people are doing, and then the ticket sales and success and failure of the organization are in large part determined by events beyond your control. You have the busiest summer of your life, and you have one of the biggest free agent signings in Celtics history, and you make a huge trade, and 5 minutes into the first game, something happens.
You carried him off the court. I saw you.
The world changes.
Yeah.
So you just, you have to know, for all of us, you have to know that there's going to be things that happen that are beyond your control. And in this business in particular, I think that's true in every business, but in a lot of businesses you can sort of plan things and your P&L is not so determined by random events. So in this business, you got to be ready to roll with those punches. And I don't recommend going to the operations side if you're not, okay having crazy ups and downs with all the people around you every day, because that's the way it's going to be. And so if you're not one of those people, I first sort of wonder why you're in sports, because everybody knows that happens in sports. But second of all, that's a weird path to take if that's sort of your attitude towards the world. But on the other hand, it's really fun. So.
Yeah. Well, I want to come back to you, Dave, but we were talking in the prep session, Meg. I mean, even exogenous events can have sponsors cancel on you. Maybe you want to speak to that a little bit.
Sure. So when I actually worked on the acquisition of the team for our owner, and when I first got down there, people were talking about the blackout. People were talking about the team potentially moving. People were talking about how old the stadium was, and people were talking about how bad the team was. What's really nice is that as of last year, people were just talking about how bad the team was. So to Mike's point, there's only so much that you can really control. And so as ownership came in, the things that we could control were the quality of the building. So as of this past spring, between the team and our owner, they will have invested collectively $170 million in the facility to improve the stadium, including adding the pools. We have 19 video boards in the bowl, and we built an amphitheater and a new indoor facility just off the back of the stadium. Those are the things that we can control. For the first time since I've been there, the team's 4-3 going into a bye week. Yeah. But we're also facing this really interesting cross-swell of people are really upset with the fact that some of our players knelt during the anthem, and what our owner has since been pretty vocal in terms of his position on it. And we are facing that crosstide of teams doing well, but people are pretty upset. And Jacksonville's the second biggest military naval community behind San Diego. It's a really heavy military town. It's the second most transient NFL market behind Washington, D.C. So the military is a really strong presence there, and people are really passionate about the issue. And so I've been out at bars. I was watching the Yankees game, and there were two firemen sitting at my table. Well, I actually encroached on their table, so I had a seat at the game. But it was father and son, two firemen in town, and we spent about 45 minutes debating why they wanted to cancel their season tickets because of what had happened during the anthem. And it was a really thoughtful, interesting dialogue, and I convinced them not to cancel their tickets and sent them all sandwiches at the firehouse the next day. But that's a real issue that we're dealing with, and none of us would have predicted that at a time when the team was 4-3, we would have to be having these conversations relating to the anthem with our fan base. I mean, Dave said it earlier, one of the most important things, right, is that don't ever forget that you're creating experiences for people that you yourself used to really enjoy, and now you get to work in that business. But that's what it's about, right? Getting people to come to the games and feel like they're a part of the team, and that everyone feels like you're uniting the community. That's sports at its best.
Mm-hmm. Jihad, what's been the reaction with the 49ers fans and sponsors?
Well, the sponsor side, we've kind of dealt with this for almost a year and a half now. So for us, it's we saw a little bit of it at the beginning of last season. So I think our sponsors really are on the same page with us at this point. But we live in a market that allows us to have these conversations with our fans, and the majority of our fans understand why our players have knelt and why they continue to kneel. And I think our owner, Jed, has been kind of at the forefront of this and speaking on behalf of the actual issues that we're trying to have addressed. So for me, that's been kind of the positive side of this. But of course, as in-house counsel, you have to deal with the individuals who put in their minds patriotism first over everything. And so, we deal with the complaints. We deal with, Better Business Bureau complaints online. We deal with all these different things where fans are saying that they're not going to come to games, or they're very disappointed with the team for supporting the players. And we just try to explain to them that, here are the things that our players feel need to be changed in our communities. And that's why they're doing this. It's not about patriotism. It's not about disrespect for the flag or the anthem, and
Or the military.
or the military generally.
Right.
And so for us, it's more about trying to have the actual conversations about the issues. And for our market, it's a little bit easier as opposed to some of the other markets where you might have people who listen more to what the president is saying about the protests. But I think Jen has done a good job of trying to refocus those conversations on the actual issues that our players feel need to be addressed in their communities and kind of the communities in general. And so the work between those efforts and our foundation and kind of the organization generally have really tried to spearhead a solutions as opposed to dissolving into an argument about what disrespect of the flag is or disrespect of the military is.
An undercurrent here, though, in the last few questions is this industry, I try to tell people all the time, sports isn't that different. This industry is different in one way, and that is the teams are almost all privately held by single or dominant majority owners. And that's not the case for a lot of businesses that people from Harvard Law School go work for. And so the owners are the personality of the owner affects each of these little businesses drastically. And so you can see what the effect of a good owner can be in each of these cases. And if you're, you may be dealing with a more Mark Cuban style owner some of the time. And that brings its own benefits and also challenges. But managing the relationship with the owner and the rest of the business is often the job of the general counsel in a lot of cases, and advising the owner on what he or she might do or say. So that's a feature of these jobs that I think is really different and is overlooked frequently, both publicly and privately in these discussions. People buy these teams for very different reasons than people ordinarily purchase businesses. And so they may have different motivations than the ordinary boss of an organization. And so hopefully you're lucky when you're in a situation like one of your players starts kneeling for the national anthem that your owner reacts in a way, because they're often the public face of the business side of the franchise, that is productive. And I think, exactly like Jihad said, that will always go a long way towards helping deal with an issue like this one.
All right. How come in baseball it hasn't been, let's go down the line, Ashwin, Paloma, and then Dave. Just football.
Yeah,
not someone that's standing for the...
I think we've had one player for
Right.
the days that's been doing it consistently. We haven't had any issues with it, so I can't say how we deal with it, but I do want to just touch briefly on what Mike just said. That's what I'm dealing with right now. Again, we have this new ownership group in place, and that's the toughest thing is getting that group up to speed on everything that we do. They didn't come, other than Mr. Jeter coming from a player background, the rest of the group didn't come from any kind of involvement really with baseball. So they're getting their heads around all the different lines of businesses we have, how things are done in a variety of different areas, and what the issues we face. And I'm trying to get a sense of what their opinions are on different issues, how they want to handle certain things. And Mike also hit on this point. Before, I was used to a group with just had one owner, one guy who owned the vast majority of the team, and I kind of knew where he stood on a variety of issues. Now I'm dealing with a consortium of different owners. Think similar to what the Celtics have, a large group of owners and a board, and it's just a different decision-making process. They have a more deliberate style of how they make decisions, and I'm just having to get used to understanding their preferences while also educating them on these issues. And so that's been my biggest challenge right now, is just kind of understanding where their preferences are and how they want certain things done. But certainly, were we to have a player kneel and have some adverse reaction from sponsors or fans, that's something we would definitely sit down and talk about, because we've got to understand kind of how our community reacts to that and how we want to react to that.
And Paloma, at MLB, with Paul and everybody else, what's been the reaction thus far?
Well, like Ashwin said, we've had, I think, one player kneeling consistently, and I haven't been a part of any of the conversations about it. But I do think that what Ashwin is touching on is really important, because these businesses are small and they're personal, not only for the people who own them, but for everyone around them. That sports mean a lot to people in a very visceral way. I mean, like Megha was saying, people take our business very personally in a way that they might not feel about consumer products or oil and gas. And So I think, these are small companies, and so internally you have to keep in mind as you're giving advice that the person who you're giving advice to is taking these business decisions personally. They matter personally, and their trust in you and your advice is a matter of, a one-on-one exercise in persuasion. But you also have to keep in mind that you have this community around you that also takes very personally what you're doing.
That's why I want to come back to you, Dave, because, nobody does more than you guys do with your foundation, and you're heavily involved with the community, and please elaborate upon it, all that work.
I think the history of sports, and one of the reasons I was excited to go from what I was doing before, I told you I was in the Attorney General's office, but why would you want to work in sports, is that sports throughout American history has had a really important role in community. You think of Jackie Robinson and the work on race issues that sports played at a time when other institutions were behind, and you could go on and on. So for us, I'll say a couple things. Our charitable foundation is one piece of it, but this year we've spent so much time on race relations. And by the way, the kneeling for the flag thing is as much about race as anything, even though some politicians may not want to suggest so, but it is. And so for us, we had a really unpleasant couple incidents in May. One was a visiting player was called the N-word, Adam Jones from the Baltimore Orioles. We learned about that in the press. And the very next day, another fan used the N-word. And so we spent a ton of our time, from our president and CEO to the legal department to other parts of our organization, thinking about this. And you have options. One option is to just ignore it and say, we're just going to focus on baseball. Or you can say, you know what, this is an opportunity, an important moment for us to exert some leadership and to be honest about what's going on, and to recognize that we aren't just a baseball team. We're part of an institutional culture in New England. So that's what we've really done. And on the race stuff, we joined with the Celtics and the other sports teams here to create a PSA that now plays before every game in every venue in pro sports that says, if you hear racist stuff or hate speech, tell security. We're all in this together. Let's be united. Let's treat each other with respect. It's a pretty good PSA. And we spent a lot of time thinking about what else we can do to set an example. And this program we're doing together is called Take the Lead. And the whole point is we shouldn't sit back passively and wait for the next thing to happen. Let's take the lead and deal with it. And by the way, it's not just race, although that's the hardest issue that we deal with, but sexual assault. I think MLB has been tremendous, reacting to some of the other leagues and stuff we've seen happen, being very proactive. What should we do to try to deal with the possibility of players or others being involved in sexual assault? So those are really tough issues, and they're really important to what we do. On the charitable community side, I'll touch very briefly. We spend a lot of our resources and time and assets trying to raise money for our team charity, which in turn does a lot of things, including supporting veterans, fighting cancer. We have an inner-city scholarship program. And that's basically because ownership, and Mike's absolutely right, who do you work for? Our owners said at the outset, we have 5 goals. One is to win championships. Let's win multiple World Series. Another is to fix Fenway Park and save it. But one of those 5 top goals for the entire organization is to be involved in the community. And so we try to do that in different ways.
Our owners, when they bought the team, said they had 2 goals, and that was, championships and being the best community citizens that we could be. So it's especially in this market here. The teams are really a community trust. It's much more than a local business that people pay attention to, and it's been that way for a very, very long time. So you won't, I could talk a lot about the things that the Celtics do, but I think the key takeaway is people pay such close attention to these businesses in the way that they don't otherwise. If you're not using that platform for some greater good, you're doing yourself and the whole community a big disservice.
The challenge for the lawyer, though, is to still be a lawyer and still do your work and not just turn into community/political stuff. So we had this serious discussion after the second N-word situation. Can we ban a fan for life? And that's a legal question. Like, can you ban a fan for life? What is a ticket? What is a license? There's also a practical question, like, what does that actually mean? And how do you find this person? And what do you do if this person sneaks in wearing a disguise? So, you still have to work as a lawyer and deal with these complicated issues, even if your leadership and your ownership says, you know what, we're going to ban fans for life if they're caught using hate speech. So what does that mean?
Yeah. Well, Paloma, at the major league level, we talked in our prep session about all the great initiatives that you've been engaged in. Maybe you want to elaborate on those, please?
I've been really inspired to see the Play Ball initiative and trying to show different people that you can connect to the game in different ways. It's not just the 1,200 very talented professionals who take the field with our major league clubs, but also it's kids playing, and you don't even need 9 people. If there's 3 of you and you want to play catch, that's playing baseball. If there's one of you has a bat and one of you has a ball, you can play baseball. And I think, for example, this year on Jackie Robinson Day, I was lucky enough to go to the Trailblazers tournament, which is a girls' baseball tournament. And it was wonderful to see these girls who were so committed to baseball, loved the game, wanted to feel connected to it. And the fact that they were able to go to Dodger Stadium and see the Jackie Robinson statue made them feel so connected to the game. And I think it really is about creating those opportunities for all our communities to feel connected to the game.
How about the RBI program, too? We talked about that.
Yes, the RBI program that develops opportunities to play baseball safely in inner cities is another one. And you see these kids coming through these programs, and it's not only about teaching them to play baseball, it's also about giving academic skills and support, because baseball can really be a part of a broader message about inclusion and achievement, and seeing the way that baseball plays into that, not just as a sport, but also as a way to build life skills, has been really moving.
And Jihad, I know, same, just go right down the line, a lot of things in the community you're doing with the 49ers, the community outreach programs.
I think we really have kind of, our foundation tends to focus on providing opportunities and education for kids in the San Francisco Bay Area, and that's really been the long-term goals of our foundation, although recently you've seen us get a little bit more involved in social and political issues. And we think that, at the direction of the York family, the DeBarlo family, we've really tried to, make an impact in that as well, because Jed's really seen that as an opportunity for us to, take a stand and be the lead here and, try to move on these issues. And so I think yesterday we released a press release talking about how we gave a grant to work with police departments in the state of California to try to have some gun reform in the state of California related to bump stocks and related to mechanisms to turn semi-automatic weapons into automatic weapons. And so, that's the types of things that, we've seen that we can make an impact on, at least in our community in the state of California, where that's more of a realistic thing than elsewhere, so that we can have it be communities together instead of having it be trying to do something on the national level where we don't really think that we may not accomplish as much. So we're trying to take the strategy of what are some things that we can do in the state of California, in the Bay Area, elsewhere, to really make an impact on these communities, and hope that others in other communities can to jump off of that point so that they can make that same impact in their communities as well.
And I know Brandon, who couldn't be here, the GC of the Ravens, is heavily involved. He's from Baltimore, and he's out in the community with the front office. And I know, Ashwin, you guys with the Marlins, too, you're out in the community, front office people, you called it your blue shirt program?
Yeah. Our signature program is called the Ayudan program, means to help in Spanish. And what I really like about it is it's not just something we kick off to our foundation or outreach group. It's something that everyone in the front office is involved with. We all, throughout the year, every day of the year, there's people out with our blue shirts, our Ayudan shirts, out in the community, reading to kids, painting schools, landscaping, doing cleanup projects, building park benches, whatever it may be. But it's really unique in the sense that I, as a legal counsel, get to go out in the community, once or twice a month. Our CFO will go out, our baseball people will go out, our IT people, whoever it is, everybody goes out and gets involved. So I really like it in the sense that it gives exposure to everybody, some of the great work that's happening in the community. It's not just something you do a legal contract for and then never see again. It's something you're actively involved in. And I think it's really important for all of our people to get that exposure.
And Megha, you told us about a number of programs that Jags are doing, kids' healthy habits.
Yeah, so I'd say that a lot of what our foundation focuses on, we were just talking earlier, but it's building community football fields, and then we have a grassroots program where we teach boys and girls about how to play flag football. And we do that here, and then we also do it in the UK on an ongoing basis. So we play a game per year in London and have committed to do that through 2020. We have 4 full-time employees in London, and one of them is focused on grassroots programs about educating kids about the program and how to play football safely in the UK. And then Jacksonville is its greatest challenge is also its greatest opportunity, that it's a small-ish town, so you feel like you can make an impact. So it's an incredible team-building opportunity for our staff to be able to go out and do things like build houses through a HabitJacks program. The foundation itself does a lot of grant-making. One of the things that I think the NFL has been doing is try to be a little bit more, as opposed to being reactive in terms of what the community outreach is, it's to be a little bit more reflective ex ante. And so just yesterday, we had a training for all of our staff, so players and all of our staff, where at this point, what started as education about domestic violence, sexual assault, and child abuse has now morphed into a larger discussion about definitions of masculinity and femininity and what it means to really develop character. To me, that's interesting because that reminds me of taking women's human rights with Catherine McKinnon 10 years ago at law school, which is as exciting to me as like learning how to play guitar from Eddie Van Halen or some other more contemporary reference that you all might actually understand. But that's what we were talking about at work yesterday, right? Is what it happens when you have sort of rigid gender roles, and how that really limits the development of men and women as a whole. And that was a discussion we were having as a staff yesterday in our office.
Okay, we're going to leave about 10 minutes for questions. We prepped for this, so what's next for you, Mike, I guess? Twofold, going off of what we did in Sanders yesterday, if you couldn't be doing what you're doing, what would you be doing?
Oh, this is
the trick question from John
Supreme
Manning.
Court
Yes.
Justices were
Yes.
asked yesterday. I don't think it would be. I don't think it would be fly fishing and ski instruction. Like Justice Gorsuch suggested yesterday. I have no clue. I never had a plan. There just never was. I thought, out of law school, I clerked on the Sixth Circuit, and I sort of thought I was going to be doing appeals. But if I hadn't gotten this job, I guess that's what I would have been doing for some period of time. I sort of loved the intellectual exercise of that, and there's brief moments in my otherwise wonderful day when I miss some of those logic-y problems. We don't have too many very complicated legal problems at the Celtics, thankfully. But I don't know. I don't. My goal has always been to keep finding really fascinating things to do, and I've been lucky enough to be able to do that in a bunch of different roles. As a consultant after college, doing econometric stuff, and now at the Celtics, among other jobs I've had. So it's a very, very difficult question. I always have said to my dad, and this is kind of going away now, but I always said to my dad, I would be just as happy working in a bookstore. I think bookstores are kind of dying, so that may not be a good career choice anymore. But there's lots of interesting things to do in the world. So hopefully I'll be lucky enough that the next thing is something interesting too.
Dave?
So for me, balancing personal and professional and family life is a hard thing. And here in Boston, I have two sons who are 15 and 11. And until they're off in college somewhere, going to their future life, I'm really going to be here. So that obviously limits to some extent what I'm not going to pick up and go work in New York or California or whatever. And I think that I see myself, hopefully, for the Red Sox for a while. If I did something else, I think it would have to be something that was both really challenging and difficult to stretch myself, but also something that I felt I believed in. And as you can tell, we all have a public element to our jobs, whether it's a public sector job for me or some other organization that has a mission that is something that helps our broader world. And I think that's why we're here celebrating this law school thing, too. We're not just here as private attorneys, but we have a larger role to play.
Thanks. Paloma?
When I got invited to interview in the commissioner's office, I had just second-chaired my first jury trial. And I loved it. I lost, but I loved it. And, it was a great experience. And, finishing it was terrible to lose, and I hated it. But I wanted to get back in there. And I really enjoyed the experience of being on my feet, being in front of the jury, being able to take that much responsibility of a case. And then I went a completely different direction. So I would really enjoy getting back into court and being a litigator. But if I couldn't be a lawyer anymore, I would absolutely be a novelist, 100%.
Jihad?
Well, for me, I think I've thought about, could I be a lifeguard in Cabo? Is that but it turns out I'm not that great of a swimmer, so that wasn't really something that would work out. And then I watch too much HGTV, and so I like to think I could rehab some houses, but then it turns out I'm not very handy. So those are pretty much done. And so when I think about within kind of the legal industry, what other options we've got, I'm in the position that I want to be in. Even when I went to Covington, I told them when I went there that they'd asked me, where do you want to be in 10 years? I said, I'd love to be in-house for the 49ers or with the team in the Bay Area, specifically the 49ers. And so I'm where I want to be. But then I think, what else would I be for whatever reason, I couldn't be there. What else am I passionate about? I would say probably tech just generally is something that I get pretty passionate about. The fact that I woke up at 2:59 this morning to pre-order the iPhone X. So I'd probably say that maybe in-house for Apple could work. Just because I have every single Apple product and I'm very passionate about that.
Would be good.
Yes, and so maybe I'd save a couple dollars there if I went ahead and went in-house with them. But I would say definitely in-house somewhere, and I would say probably being from the Bay Area in tech and some of the companies that I really do like there, probably Apple, something like that.
Ashwin?
Sure. So to answer your first question, I'm really excited about our new ownership group, and I hope that I'll get the chance to stay on and really see it through. I think we have a great opportunity to re-engage our community and hopefully build up our fan base. So my hope is to stay where I am and continue growing with the team.
Ashwin wants his current job next.
Yes.
Right.
Thank you for clarifying. It's on camera, right? Okay.
God.
If in the unfortunate circumstance that I do not have my current job, I think I kind of do the same thing exercise Jihad did in terms of thinking about what I'm passionate about. And for me, I think it would be travel. I love to travel any chance I get. I love to go internationally. So I would probably look to go in-house maybe at an airline or something in the travel sector. And if I couldn't be a lawyer, I don't know, I'd try my hand at being a pilot and see how that goes. Maybe a flight attendant. I don't know.
Only Harvard Law School's grad working as a flight attendant. Awesome.
Megha?
So I say that one of the things that I love about my current job is that I got totally bamboozled. So my first week there is when they told me that I would have HR and IT as well. Luckily, most IT problems are solved by being like, hey, just restart your computer, it'll be fine. I tell people that. But it's been, even since I started with all the real estate development, the acquisition of another soccer team, what's great and what I think is in part is sort of what I've heard everyone else say is that as long as you continue to be learning and continue to be challenging your current job, it's actually sort of hard to think about what the next job would be. But aside from chasing Eddie Van Halen for guitar lessons, I would like to be a rock star. And if that doesn't work, I actually really enjoy teaching. So one of my favorite things when I was in law school was that I was a TA for Professor Carfagna's classes, but then also for moral reasoning for justice and bioethics at the undergrad level. And that was a tremendous amount of fun. And then I'm teaching sports law and ethics at Jacksonville University this fall. So I really enjoy that piece of it. It's so there are many times where talking feels like it's not particularly fruitful. One of the things that I miss, and actually me and Fulham's lawyer now have bi-weekly calls because we miss having academic intellectual discussions, and you really don't have the time at the office day to day unless you build in the time. So he and I will call each other and nerd out every 2 weeks about sort of esoteric academic legal issues that affect both of us just because we sort of miss that academic discussion.